We're going to hear now from Austin Parker, who's going to talk about Vagrant and how to use it for virtual environments. Vagrant is a very hot topic. You heard this morning from the cloud services. Vagrant is something that will help you create virtual services. So this is a really important topic to hear from. Austin Parker is an informatics student, and he also has a previous life as an information technologist. So please welcome Austin.
Hello. I probably don't even use that half the time. So, I'm Austin. I'm talking about Vagrant and Puppet, actually, and a concept I want to introduce called platform as code for the research and learning environment. So, let's start off with a picture in your head, I guess. We're in a scenario. We've got a large, multidisciplinary research or learning environment. Maybe you're working with a team of people that are scattered across the country or world with collaboration tools like GitHub. This is something that is not a dream anymore. This is a definite possibility that might happen. Or you're working with perhaps a massively MOOC, a massive online course. So maybe everyone's in a different time zone. Maybe everyone doesn't even speak the same language. And maybe everyone has different computers. That's a lot more common than we like to think. I've got a MacBook. A lot of people use various versions of Linux, Windows. Who knows? And I tell you, okay, go install Python. And if anyone's ever had to deal with installing Python and trying to get, SciPy, NumPy, any number of these different libraries all playing together nicely across 50 different computers without a standard image, that can be pretty tricky. So how do we make sure everyone's working with the same tools? It's important because we're working in a research environment, if everyone's on maybe slightly different versions of different libraries, how do we guarantee that any problems that occur with data analysis are because of some algorithmic flaw, not necessarily because there's a problem with, you're using 0.8 and I'm using 0.9 of this random Python library. If I'm teaching a class or I'm a learner, how do I make sure that I'm getting the results I'm supposed to be getting if I don't know that, well, gosh, you're using Python 3, you're using 2.7, or you're using 2.7.4. It's a mess. And that's the problem. So what's the solution? Something called infrastructure as code. This comes from the DevOps world, which is a software development methodology. It's something like Agile. It's basically the integration of software developers and operations specialists. So the people that are handling the servers, the underlying infrastructure that you're running your application on, and the people that are actually developing it. It's a way to programmatically automate infrastructure tasks, such as deploying a server, or making sure that you've got the right build system installed. Infrastructure, your hardware, servers, monitoring analytics software, everything you need to run the application that you're trying to develop, or perhaps the research project you're trying to work on. But that's not really enough for our purposes sometimes. What if we need 50 different libraries that are all dependent on some random other library? What if we need to make sure that we're not updating things automatically? Maybe we need this one specific version because this is the one specific version of this one specific library that we have approved, and they come out and they introduce 2 more versions, and without going through a whole big review process, how are you going to make sure that they didn't break something when they introduce those updates? So with platform as code is the solution here. By using tools like Vagrant and Puppet, we're able to extend the model of infrastructure as code to our development tools, our libraries, and sometimes even our development, like our IDE. There's less support headaches with this system. So you bring on new people, you point them to where your Vagrant file is, you point them to where your configuration files are on a GitHub repository or a private repository, through any source control system, or Dropbox, or on an FTP server. They download it. It's all open source tools. And they type Vagrant up, and there you go. customize these tools to your needs. I can say, for instance, I want this specific version of Python to be installed. I can even do branching decisions and conditionals, like I want this specific version. If not, then here's how we get it. Or if I'm supporting two different configurations, I can have logic that handles that case too. The real power of all this, though, is it's write once, run anywhere. I can deploy this locally. I can download Vagrant on pretty much any computer you can imagine, on any Linux distribution you can imagine. And I can run this in a virtual environment on my local machine, or I can put this on a server. I can put this on a university mainframe if they support virtualization. I can put this on Amazon Web Services. I can put this on OpenStack. Yeah. Pretty much any cloud provider you can think of is going to have some way to integrate with Vagrant. So it's as simple as setting a flag when you invoke your virtual environment. So the foundation of our platform as code is these two tools, Vagrant and Puppet. Vagrant lets you manage and provision virtual development environments. It's simple to configure, and it's easy to share the files, both with the actual configuration files with your audience. More importantly, it's easy to share files between your host operating system and your client operating system. I'll show you a little more about that in a few minutes when I do a demo, but essentially I can have a folder on my computer locally that I drop files into. They show up instantly in the development environment, in the virtual server. And that way I can write things locally, I can make edits locally, I can do whatever I want to locally without having to necessarily be constrained by this small development, this potentially smaller virtual server. Puppet is an automation framework. There are several different tools you can use for this. Puppet's what I like, what I have some experience with. There are tools like Chef, or even simple bash shell scripting can be used for your automation. With Vagrant, it's easy to use Puppet though, because you just drop it in, you point it to a file, and it reads everything off and goes. It's got a declarative, model-based approach to define the state of the environment, which is a lot of fancy words for it. It's really easy to get Puppet to do exactly what you want without having to, hard code in URLs. And it'll also work. One Puppet file can work from multiple different distributions. So if you decide that I want to change from Gentoo to Arch Linux, all I have to do is have a flag in there that checks for the state of the host OS, client OS, and it will automatically point to the new package manager for that system. So let's get started with it. You can download Vagrant at this URL. You can find the Vagrant box at Vagrant Cloud, which is a new service that HashiCorp is offering. It's very nice. One other thing that's important about Vagrant Cloud is you're able to also customize these. So you can make your own distribution of a Vagrant box that has just your tools in it, just your tool chain in it, everything you need, package that up, upload it to Vagrant Cloud, share it with the world. And you don't have to worry about where am I going to host, a 600 megabyte image of Arch Linux. The initial setup's pretty easy. This part I've already done. You essentially create a folder for your Vagrant environments. You go to it, you invoke Vagrant, box add. HashiCorp Precise 32 is a 32-bit Ubuntu image that is pre-configured with Puppet, and then you initialize it with Vagrant in. That generates your configuration file. To get Puppet working, you create a manifest directory within that Vagrant folder, and then touch a default file in there to basically give you a starting point to define your configuration. So, we can actually go and see some of this. Everyone see that, or is the text good? Okay. So I've already gone through and configured my Vagrant file and my manifest file. As you can see, the Vagrant file doesn't have a lot to it. This is a very simple configuration. What I'm telling you is, I want you to configure this box, and I want you to use this provisioning system. And then I tell it what to actually do with that provisioning system. Different provisioning systems, so Puppet is going to be different than Chef. It's going to look for files in different places. There are very, very detailed tutorials about how to do this if you're interested in using a different provisioning system. But this is your basic get started quick. Once you've done that, you can go in and set up your Puppet configuration. So in this, again, not a lot going on here. First thing is you update your packages. One nice thing is this, like I said, this supports logic and conditional. So I can say, if I'm on a Debian-based client, then I'm going to use aptitude. But if I'm on Arch, I'm going to use Pacman. Or if I'm on Red Hat, I'm going to use something different. And by defining it this way, what you're doing is you're essentially telling it this is the state I want. So it doesn't. It's smart enough that what it'll do is it'll look and see. Let's say I'm building something. Maybe it's already has some of this stuff done. It's going to just make sure that the build essential package is there. Maybe my box already has that, but if it doesn't, I want it to install. So in this case, I'm just doing some basic stuff. Build essential, Git, Python dev packages, and Python dev. So once I've set up my Vagrant file in my Puppet, starting the virtual environment is simple as Vagrant up. And then it's going to start executing commands I put into the Vagrant file and the commands that I put into that Puppet manifest. A couple of other neat things to notice while this is going on. Vagrant automatically will forward a SSH port from the client to your host. Accessing that is as easy as typing Vagrant SSH once the box is in loaded. One other thing I've got on here is a plugin that checks to make sure that the VirtualBox test editions are the same between my box and my copy of VirtualBox I have installed. And those let us do things like share folders between the client and the host and handle networking passwords. It takes a couple minutes. Here's a real call. Once it's done with this, it's going to start launching into the Puppet manifest configuration, which you should see pretty shortly. And it will explain that. One other neat thing while we're waiting on this is that now there's a new feature I haven't chance to play around a lot called Vagrant Share, where with another line of configuration, you can actually essentially expose your Vagrant environment to the internet through their online portal. For instance, if I was doing a web application, and this is a very popular stack we use in web applications, I can create my Apache, my LAMP stack and everything, and expose that through its URL. Someone else, a client, a colleague, whoever, can go to that URL in the browser, and they will have access to that virtual environment on your machine through the Vagrant Share feature. All right, now it's running Puppet. So you can see it's getting a couple notices that each stage is going through, and it's done. Didn't take very long. So what did I not have to do? I didn't have to go through and configure networking. It automatically configured networking for me. I didn't have to go through and mess with a lot of arcane, weird, virtual BS. I didn't have to tell it I want this size environment. The box file handled all that for me. Once I've got it done, I can just type Vagrant SSH, and I will drop into my virtual machine. So now, this is if I switch to Vagrant directory, this is actually the directory I have locally on my client or my host machine. I can drop something in there, I can drop a file in there, I can work on a file in there, save that, and it immediately is updated here because I'm just sharing a folder back and forth. So there is one concern, and some people probably have already thought about it, with a virtual environment, and that's performance. So this is a very simple percent prime binder. It should take about a minute to get to 2,000 something. When I ran this yesterday, the other day, it found the 4,428% prime in about 140 seconds. When I ran it locally without the virtual environment, it found it in about less than half that time, about 50 seconds. The important thing to note is that these boxes, this default box is not configured to be high performance. It has 384 megabytes of RAM. It uses one core on the machine. Not exactly a powerhouse. But you can tweak that. You can make a more powerful box specification and upload it and use that one. You can also deploy these to the cloud. If I had an AWS account and I wanted to put this on a huge AWS instance with more computing power than I could ever possibly fit into a laptop, I invoke that with Vagrant up, I flag AWS, and it just right online. I can put that on Google Computing. I can do, like I said, I can put it pretty much wherever there's a cloud provider that will accept it. And then I can scale. So if I'm in a research project and I'm using this to do analysis, I'm using pandas or I'm using SciPy or something on, 200 million record corpus, then maybe I'm not going to do the entire thing in the VM, but I can do a sample query, make sure that I'm getting what I expect with those first few results, put it on the cloud, and then let the cloud take it. And I don't have to worry about, how much time I'm spending on my local machine. Even better, I can just walk away from it, and tomorrow morning it'll be done. So we're going to cancel out of that. Once I'm done with the Vagrant environment, I can log out, close the connection, and there's a couple things you can do. I can Vagrant halt, which will stop it, or if I want to just I want to kill everything on there. Let's say I've done some modifications, or I've installed some stuff that doesn't really work. I just want to go back to 0, Vagrant destroy. Yes. And this wipes out the virtual environment, forces the shutdown, deprovisions everything, gets rid of the hard drive, and everything that was brought up with that VM is now gone and dead. And when I do Vagrant up again, it reprovisions it. So like I said, nice if you've been messing around with stuff on there, you've got it to a bad state, you can't, you either can or don't want to figure out what you've done. Vagrant destroy, it's done. So, some final notes. Performance is an issue, but said you can deploy it to the cloud. If you're a VMware user, Vagrant does have a lot of good support for VMware Fusion or several of their enterprise packages. So you're not locked into VirtualBox. I'm using VirtualBox because it's free, it's open source. Well, it's free at least. But it's not the most blazing virtualization package ever. There's a lot more to this than what I've shown. This is just absolute basics of how you can get started in 5 minutes with Vagrant and Puppet. But there's books. There are huge books about how to do all this. And honestly, I haven't even touched on it a lot. I know the really popular thing, like I said, is in web application development because you can deploy your web server, your entire stack, all of your weird node stuff, all of your weird PHP stuff, extensions, whatever you have, and share that around with everyone on your team, and they all work off it. You don't have to worry about, especially with things like Node or a lot of web technologies where they do iterate very, very rapidly, and there are a lot of things that might be completely different from version to version. That's a really good argument for using Vagrant and Puppet to create this defined environment, lock it down, make sure everyone's working on the same page, because oh my gosh, now you've got, it's bad enough that you've got 3 different browsers to test this stuff in that none of them can agree on how exactly JavaScript should be parsed. So, that's Vagrant and Puppet. If anyone has any questions, I can try to answer them. Yo, Chris.
So as far as security is concerned, with Vagrant, I've got like a web application running, and I've exposed it. Is there anything to break out of that? And the actual system that's running it. I guess so. You see like LVC, let's see like meters.
Yeah.
Sort of
Yeah, I can't speak authoritatively on that. The question was what kind of security you have with your virtual environment versus your client. I can say in general, when you're exposing through the web, you're essentially doing tunneling through SSH out to this remote server that's living somewhere, right? So there's some sort of authentication method. You have to log in, you know. But if you look for purpose security, I am not aware of a whole lot of attacks in the wild specifically targeted virtual environments. So let's assume that someone did, you know, somehow man in the middle of that SSH session back to your virtual environment, then they should be, unless they're the NSA, locked into that virtual environment and unable to touch anything on the host or on your client machine that you're running this all on. Obviously, if you're sharing folders and files between your virtual environment and your local machine, then that could be a security issue, especially if you're sharing into directories that have executable code in. But if you suddenly see files appearing in that shared folder that you don't know how they got there, then you probably be well advised to not close it. Does that?
Yeah, I mean, that's, I guess that's kind of what
yeah, I mean,
it sounds like security, right? Is a spectrum.
Yeah,
so it's what you're protecting against.
Right. I mean, if you're concerned about like just random script kiddies getting into it, it's probably safe. If you're concerned about the NSA looking inside the virtual environments, then you're probably out of luck with server hill, right? Anyone else?
Do you have a feeling of how this compares to things like Docker, where they're packaging your own libraries?
Docker?
How does it compare to that kind of approach? So they're obviously doing a similar thing where they're providing a packaging of a web app in a container in a virtual environment rather than putting the whole virtual environment. How to compare whether you perform that approach.
I'm not as familiar with Docker, but I can say in general, what attracts me to Vagrant and Puppet is that it's very customizable and that it's very extensible for more than just web apps. So, like I said, I'm not 100% sure what the feature differences are, but I would suspect, I do know that Vagrant is certainly the popular tool right now. That doesn't necessarily mean it's the best tool, but it's the one that's sort of in the zeitgeist, and maybe that's because, especially for this purpose, it's got a lot of things you can hook into. It's got a lot of power in terms of customization. You can throw pretty much any provisioning application you want at it. I mean, you can replace all that I did in that Puppet script with bash scripts, and it'll work just as well. But it's a little bit easier to do a Puppet manifest than to do a bunch of bash scripting, especially if you don't know how to do bash scripting, right? I don't know if that's, we can talk afterwards, and you can kind of tell me some of what Docker does that this doesn't.
Docker actually sits on top of C.
Okay, so yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's just different ways of attacking the same problem, right? Please.
My question was about how do you find the IP address of your guest?
How do you find the IP address of your virtual environment?
Yes.
By default, it doesn't expose an external one. It runs it, it maps, I think, it maps 22 on the remote to 222 on the, or 2222 on your host, and then just Vagrant SSH is essentially a macro to put you into that. If you want to expose different ports or expose them through an interface, like a local interface, I could easily have set something in there that exposed port 9268 through my wireless or through my Ethernet, through whatever actual client interface I wanted. I didn't, but again, it's what do you need it for? Do you need a virtual environment that's going to be talking to the internet all the time, or are you happy with one that can just pass through your existing connection without specifying, I want this to be port open so that I can broadcast this out to the world? When you're using the Vagrant share feature, then that's a little bit different because that's creating an SSH tunnel to their cloud. You're actually tunneling through their services, and they're doing a lot of stuff in the back end that you don't really even have to see. I believe all it is you authenticate. You sign up on the website, you authenticate to it, and then it just kind of handles mapping all those external ports and services for you. Questions? Yes? Okay. You got 5 minutes.
Do I have to learn Ruby?
You don't have to learn Ruby, but it might be a good idea for your career.
No, what I mean is, so, Puppet, for instance, lets you essentially configure without necessarily needing.
Right.
And as far as that simple configuration is concerned, you quite really need to know Ruby. Do you find as your papers are becoming more complex, that you sort of need to really understand Ruby and some of the languages
Yeah. That's a good question.
Could you repeat the question? No.
The question is, do you need to know Ruby? Do you need to know Ruby? Do you need to know the underlying technologies that these services are programmed in to really get good at understanding how to configure them? And that's a good question. I would say for most people, now let's take a hypothetical. I'm an ops guy, and I'm going to go work at startup, number 2,368 in the Valley, and I'm being hired to do nothing but this. Then yes, you should know Ruby, and you should know Python. You should know the back-end stuff that powers these tools. But if you're just if you're not really getting that deep into it, I don't think it's that necessary, because most of the time, if you want to plug in, there's something to plug in, you install it, boom, Gem bundle install, or Gem install, whatever. And then it just kind of sits there and works. I mean, Vagrant is right? I didn't need to know Ruby to install it. Ruby, quite helpfully, already comes to my MacBook, so. Again, it's a question of how deep you want to get. Do you want to really extend this out, and do you want to build your own plugins? Do you have weird corner cases that you want to catch, and you need something tailor-made to that? Then, yeah, knowing the language, being able to write extensions for it is very powerful and important. If you're just using it, probably not that important. I mean, it's not like, would it be nice if this was in, the configuration of like JSON? Sure. Or some other sort of really interpretable format. But I feel like Puppet's configuration is a lot easier to understand than Vagrant's. Honestly, it's just the way it's written. It sort of flows better. You don't have to really parse that many arcane things. If you start getting deep into it, you do a lot of the logical stuff, then yeah, you're going to have some issues with you need to have the programmer thing to understand all your chain conditionals and your loops. But for the most part, standard users are okay, not really knowing much beyond the basic, how to work with it and stuff, right? Okay, anybody else?
What would you recommend for somebody to learn more about Vagrant?
If you want to learn more about Vagrant, they have a website. It is a good website. The documentation is on there. Vagrantup.com has the documentation. I'll show you. And it's got everything from using Vagrant Share, setting your Vagrant file, networking, syncing folders, using different providers. There's tons of stuff. Puppet is puppetlabs.com, I believe. Yeah, Puppet Labs. And then documentation at the top. And yeah, there's also a lot of tutorials on it. One thing to keep in mind with tutorials online is Vagrant iterates very rapidly. A lot of tutorials, if you see a tutorial online from 2013 or 2012, that's not going to be the current version. Things have changed. So try to make sure that you're using up-to-date resources when trying to learn this on your own, so you don't get caught with learning how to do stuff that was applicable in version 1.0 when now we're on 1. Whatever, or pre-1.0 version. All right, that's all I got. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I am at Austin L. Parker. Who wants a selfie? Is that what we do? This is what we do these days, right? Get selfies for everything on Twitter.